Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of this conversation. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told. And here's my question for today. What kind of intrapersonal communicating and work do we need to do before we can really start to think about the way we're showing up to our interpersonal communication? That's a really slight distinction that you probably caught there. Intrapersonal and interpersonal. So that's intrapersonal being everything that happens within you, your communication with yourself, the way you talk to yourself, the way you think about things, the way you relate to the world around you within yourself. Interpersonal, as we know, is the communication happening between us and other people. And this is something that Don and I are getting into in part 2 of this conversation, which if you haven't listened to part 1, definitely go back and do that first before joining us for this conversation. There's a link to that in the description. What Don and I spend some time talking about in this conversation is that there's some intrapersonal work that really should be done before moving to the space of interpersonal work. You can really, do both at the same time, but it just makes sense that the way we show up to ourselves affects the way we show up to other people. Anyway, today Don and I will be continuing our conversation. Don has some more great ideas and insights and some games even to share with us today. So let's jump right back in with him.
I think the thing that great about CMM is it puts, there's a lot of talk about from therapeutic worlds and beyond and in the public discourse now about boundaries and expectation setting. And I think that vocabulary is incredibly important. It's advancing thinking and behaviors that are productive for people. I think what CMM adds is a relational perspective on that.
Right.
So how do I address the relationship here and not just here's my needs, as important as those are, right? We need to express needs, but also think about what's the relational component of this? What would be the purpose of expressing here's my needs in a situation? I think it has to do with episode. Like how could we frame this episode to have a good social world between us? Right?
Yeah.
We do have social worlds between us. There's the idea of the relational empathy. Have you ever heard of third culture building? Do this in improv. I get people to say the numbers 1, 2, and 3 to each other, and then they have to say any word whatsoever. 1, 2, 3, orange table, right, at the same time.
Right.
They repeat it over and over as a little exercise. 1, 2, 3, parrot, dog. Okay. And they just keep doing it till they come to the same word.
Yeah.
I use that little improv exercise to teach about a concept called third culture building that's been in communication for quite a while. And this gets at the idea that we build social worlds between us. We build a culture between us.
Yeah.
And it's not just about cultures out there. I come with a cultural background, you come with a cultural background, and then we meet each other and we adapt. It's that when we communicate, we create a reality together.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what CMM gets at with this stuff and episode work. And we're always creating cultures between us through repeated trust-filled communication. Especially, we develop something that didn't exist before. I think the analogy is like if you've had a best friend for many years, when you get together, even if you haven't seen each other maybe 2 years or so, you get together and you start talking and there's words and terms and phrases you might use between each other no one else would understand. Right. But that's a little social world you built with another person, a culture you built with them that didn't exist without that relationship and communication. So, yeah.
I think that activity is such a great way to visualize kind of the way that we're co-creating.
I was going to have us do it, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's so funny when the pandemic happened, I was trying to figure out how much of this how many of these exercises translate to Zoom.
Right.
It's one that doesn't. It's like
that's hard.
You can't hear each other say the same word at the same time. It gets So anyways, I had to just describe it, but it's good. It's a fun one to watch. Can I pick up on one other thing you mentioned there? It seemed to me, I heard this in, just what you were saying about expectations, which we all have. And I think we struggle through. And It seems to me that an area that a lot of this work can go in next is intrapersonal.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about, I think, interpersonal. We get that in CMM and similar concepts, and we get organizational, and there's been lots of, I think there's a thread to follow with intrapersonal communication, which has not received as much attention.
Yeah, immediately I think that's super fascinating. And what I'm thinking of in my own experience and what I think you're saying is that a good preface to showing up the way we want to in our interpersonal relationships is to do some revision of what our intrapersonal communication looks like within ourselves, the way we're framing things. And I know that to be true in my experience with learning about CMM, because for me, I really am working on still, it's always a process, but working on embodying, a value around emergence and letting things emerge. And the concept of meaning making is so, exciting to me and new. And that's a lens I'm like always seeing things through now. It's how I think about things. And so because it's like an embodiment, it's not just like a thought, an idea that someone once said to me or a skill that I read about. It's like a really becoming like the fiber of my being.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, at least, I might be getting it wrong, but from what you were trying to get us to, but that's the intrapersonal that's happening. That is then in turn affecting the way I am able to be in interpersonal contexts.
I love that you're bringing it to the body level as well, because that's so important. Academic work overemphasizes the cognitive, the thinking level of things. And thankfully, I think in the past decade or two, there's been much more attention to, oh no, we have bodies. This physiology really affects how things are going. And I was just talking on another talk with another group this week about, I think it was David Brooks in The Atlantic, and another author had a piece come out about the meanness of Americans right now. And these surveys showing people are just mean toward each other. And in the very toxic political environment that we're in right now, what a fun week in the news cycle this has been.
Oh my God.
Meanness, that's not an intellectual thing. That is a deep, that is gut, emotional, behavioral, affective realm of things. And so we have to incorporate that into our understandings of communication and anything we're doing. It has to be body, mind, spirit, all of it, not just any one part of it. That's why I think we've overemphasized ideology. Like ideology, ideas. That's really, it's just about the exchanging back and forth of ideas. That's what politics is about. No, it's probably way more about the body.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's books coming out on this kind of thing all the time, but this is deeply embodied stuff. With the intrapersonal, have you heard of internal family systems theory? Yeah. As we talk about intrapersonal communication, I think this is a bright spot, right? And it's from fields like therapy, and it's been used in a lot of different contexts. Some people are using it for, how do I raise good kids and things like that. Yeah. It's come up, I've seen a lot of different applications of it, but it has me thinking further about this intrapersonal component, where it's about communication inside the self. And if anybody's ever seen Pixar's movie Inside Out, it's about, in the command center of the brain, there's the angry part, there's the happy part, the sad part, and they each take over the control center at different points. And that's a reductive version of this, but actually gets at something similar, which is that the human mind is multiple, that we've had this mono mind idea for centuries that has not served us well in an understanding of the brain and how people work. And so it's this idea that we all have a core self, which shows up in just about every religious tradition and things like that, right? But there's also parts of us that develop in proactive or reactive ways, sometimes in the face of trauma. For instance, a part, almost like a subpersonality, will develop that is intended to protect, and sometimes has managing or extreme behaviors that manifest. Someone does not seem like themselves right now, or, in our own lives, we feel that way. Oh, I feel, part of me feels this way, part of me feels that way. This is a whole theory and really sort of system of therapeutic practice that is about recognizing, I think, from CMM perspective, the flows of intrapersonal communication we have from day to day, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories that are competing, the cognitive dissonance we have between different parts of ourselves as we face different situations. So I don't want to go too far into that. I think it's a rabbit hole.
Of
But
course.
I do think it's an interesting parallel.
It is.
It flies in the face of a lot of popular thinking about people are just individuals and that's all there is. And for me, the most interesting idea is the idea that no, we have internal worlds.
Yeah.
As well as dealing with the relational external worlds, and those affect each other. But there's almost like a family there's like families inside oneself right. So I think that's interesting. And an area that could progress some of our understandings of communication as well, inside and outside.
You're making me think a lot of things, but one of the things I want to go back to first is the idea that we have, overvalue the conceptualizing of different things. And exactly what you're saying, I was immediately thinking that, I go into therapy a lot of times and I'm like, my therapist will say something to me and I'm like, intellectually, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm with you. I totally understand that. Realistically, emotionally, in my body, I don't quite know that, or my body isn't acting like we know that.
Yeah.
And so there is that disconnect there where there's maybe a couple different kinds of knowing that happens in maybe those different parts that you're getting at. And that's the language that I like from internal family systems, that it is parts. And, to again, circle us back to the idea of revision, is that part of the conversation from when I've heard people talk about internal family systems is that you can do a real acknowledgement of, okay, this part of me, this angry part, this anxious part, this defensive part developed to protect me for a really good reason because of my family system, because of, different events in childhood. Now I can look at this part, say, thank you so much for protecting little me. I don't actually need you anymore. I'm going to do work on making a new part, or readjusting my relationship to this part.
Giving you a new role.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's, first of all, what a beautiful, gentle way to speak to yourself as you go about the work of, your own intrapersonal revision that maybe people do. It's a challenging process to really look at yourself and look at your patterns and, and then you maybe have the default way that you've done things, and it takes real effort and energy to change to a more intentional way of doing things. But I just think it's so valuable. And this is just a silly analogy, but it came to me at the beginning of our conversation. I want to share it because I've kind of talked myself back to it. But I'm thinking about the difference between communication skills and a communication perspective, the difference between, kind of a default way of doing things versus a more intentional way of doing things. And also, thinking about what's the better social world, what's the end goal, and then working backwards from there. My boyfriend used to play the game Stratego growing up a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh, yeah.
I had never played it. He recently got the game and wanted to play. And so, first of all, we're coming at this game with very different contexts and experiences. But, you could think about it like chess or any kind of game like that, where you're taking turns and you have the end goal to win, to get the other person's flag, since it's like a capture the flag kind of situation on a board. And I just am thinking about communication skills, maybe looks like me having zero knowledge about the strategy of this game, going, okay, I guess I'm going to move this character over here. I'm going to do this move. And I'm making kind of individual choices without looking at the bigger picture of the game, because I can't see the bigger picture of the game yet. But now I'll share that we've played it a couple times and I still don't have as deep as an understanding of the strategy as he does. But the way that I approach the game is different now because I have more of an understanding of the strategy. And so I think that's if we're not asking ourselves the question of, well, what do we think a better social world looks like?
Yeah.
What are we working towards? We're just making random moves, because all we understand is the function of the game, but not really the, point or the goal or the way that the elements work together to create that goal. And so if we're not asking ourselves, what is a better social world, we're just kind of moving pieces around the board. But if we say, okay, my objective is to have this kind of social world, and then work backwards from there to say, what moves do I need to do now to get to that win, quote unquote, if it's a game,
Yeah.
I just thought that was like, that came to me at the beginning of the conversation. I was like, I hate to use a war metaphor because that's kind of like, what the game is like aggressive, you're, trading off. It's a war situation. But I just think that's an interesting way to conceptualize the difference between skill and perspective, and having a goal to guide you in your intentional little steps along the way.
By the way, I wouldn't shy away from the war metaphor here. But Buckminster Fuller, some time back, had a whole piece on the need for the U.S. government to invest in peace games. So instead of, it was like the opposite view, since we spend so much time in the military, thinking in a military way, a militaristic manner, why don't we invest so much into what would it take for diplomacy and peace and things like that? So I think you can improvise off of that structure. Yeah, strategic. No one's going to die playing this game, right? Yeah. So I love that, and it also, that made me think of there's a book called I think it's The Art of Possibility by Zander and Zander. They have this phrase called "be the board," which I love. It says any situation you're in, be the board. Don't just be the piece. Imagine what it is to be the board too. Yeah. What would you see from the board's perspective that you can't see just from the individual? So you're alternating between those levels to try to figure out how to do whatever you're doing well, but not just getting stuck in your own positionality, in your own perspective, probably fixed way of thinking and seeing.
Yeah, that's language is bringing me right back to the hierarchy model too, where you can kind of oscillate between episode and then the larger contexts, a number of those that are at play. If you are, let's say, playing Stratego or in whatever context that you are having to think about, what am I doing right now? What am I doing this turn? Yeah. And at the same time, you go back and forth between zooming out and zooming in, zooming out and zooming in, so that you can have that perspective. To be the board, to be the piece, to be the board, to be the piece. Yeah.
I like that zoom out, zoom in.
Yeah.
Way of can I make a candid admission?
Please.
I've always struggled a bit with the hierarchical model because, like I said, when it comes to just saying, let's just do episode work at like one level. Yeah, I get that. And I can see the applications. Once I start getting into the other levels and how they change priority, I get a bit lost. And
listen, you're in good company.
Okay, maybe that's it. Maybe it's that the way to do it is to zoom in on a particular level, mine for insights as much as you can, then zoom back out and do it that way, versus I find myself going like, is culture above identity right now?
Yeah, right.
And how would I know? And what if someone else had a different understanding? And so I think it's a really useful tool, but I think that part of it we need to work on a little bit. So,
and again, you're in good company, because I think like if you go back and listen to one of my early episodes where I explain the hierarchy model, I think in the first like 30 seconds, I'm like, this is the one I understand the least, but let's, let's learn together.
Yeah,
because it's challenging. And I think the good news is, like we've said, the study of communication is very young, and there's lots of room left for developing more understanding. And so we can, devote some more time to understand the hierarchy model, or see if there's other ways that make sense to play with it. But yeah, I think it is maybe a good tool for reflection. That's how I understand it, or it makes sense to me more as a tool for reflection than I would probably struggle to use it in the moment, kind of like you're saying, because maybe I could look back and be like, what was really guiding me was this like commitment to my identity, or like you're saying, commitment to culture, whatever one of these hierarchies I thought was kind of rising to the top. That's maybe something I could see with some distance and doing some reflection. But in the moment, I feel like that is a lot more challenging. Yeah.
It's a board level move at that level that I think is hard to make. And I think, by the way, my assumption that I referred to about like, am I doing this right? And I don't think that's the spirit in which any of these tools were ever generated. I think it was always meant to be understand as much as you can, but build on it, change it, adapt it, use it in different ways.
Yeah, that's why I really like, the language that a lot of people use is to be CMM-ish, because that feels so expansive.
Right.
It's not limiting.
Yeah. I have a sabbatical coming up this year at work. And one of the things I'm hoping to work on is looking at conflict. I teach a class in conflicts and negotiation. And it seems to me, and I use so much CMM in there, but threading together some different levels for folks. What do we do with ourselves in a conflict?
Yeah.
William Ury had a book called The First Negotiation, which I love. Ury and Fisher were the ones that had Getting to Yes, that book about 4 ways to do conflict. And it was framed in a very individualistic way, as well as thinking about relationships. And that was good. But it was interesting. Ury at some point wrote this other book. And he said, I came to realize the first negotiation anyone faces is with ourselves. And so I'm going to start thinking much more intrapersonal, how that connects with interpersonal, but what is it we can be doing ourselves to be ready to do CMM concepts well, what concepts play out in intrapersonal life. And I'm going to be thinking about that Stratego example that you raised.
Yeah.
That's a good one for this.
Yeah. Well, out of curiosity, I just want to know a little bit more about how you do use improv. And so I'm curious, if we're playing Stratego, if we're thinking with the goal of our better social world in mind, what are the moves we need to be doing right now to, get to the better social world that you described at the beginning of our conversation? What other kind of improv tools do you use and find useful? And how have you seen those actually be put to work in people's lives? If you have any stories like that you can think of off the top of your head.
Sure. And I think maybe even versus a story, we could just show listeners, we'll do a little show versus tell moment here.
Yeah.
If you're willing to do this, to go back to what do I think are good qualities of a good social world? I'd said democracy, open space for communication, and joy. Just getting people into that realm, I think, is important. So let's do a little exercise together.
Okay.
It's very simple, Abbie. And for anyone listening, you can do this with your teams, by the way. It's always a hit. And I think the lessons are pretty profound, but it's a good base for where we're going to go. When you're using improvisational games or exercises to teach or train communication skills, perspectives, it's very important to start with easy stuff. But you don't want to throw people into really advanced situations too fast. So this is easy. And to show how easy it is, we're just going to count the numbers 1, 2, and 3 back and forth to each other. So it goes like this: 1, 2, 3, and then we go back to 1. So 1, 2, 3. But the deal is, I want to go as fast as possible. Okay. Both of us. So you ready? Here we go. 1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3.
Okay, we're going to stop right there. Okay. So can I ask you, how are you feeling as we did this? Just think embodied, all that stuff we've just talked about. How are you feeling?
I think I was a little tense over here in the body.
I could see it. I could see
I'm like leaning in. Yeah.
1, 2, right? And very tense. And I can tell you, I do this with groups of people. It's really always amazing to see this with like 30 people in a room. They're in pairs doing this. And I say, what did you notice? What did you observe as you did this? And some people say, well, a little bit of nervous laughter here and there. And then people really start coming out with, oh, I realized when I messed up, I blamed the other person. It was like, they were like, no, it's 3. It's 3. Like, or they blame themselves and they implode, right? It's like 1, 2, oh, where am I? Oh, right. And they freak out. So that's fun. What I most often notice is nonverbal behaviors. People get very tense.
Yeah, right.
We're going to go fast. I see people like their shoulders are fixed and they're like, 1, 2, 3, 1.
Yeah.
Like, and I sometimes do this with like executive students, MBA students. They've had finance, they've had accounting, they've had statistics. They know how to use.
They know numbers.
And yet counting the numbers 1, 2, and 3 back and forth to each other.
Yeah.
they're having a hard time with.
That's
So
so funny.
I tell them this identifies that there is a knowledge and performance gap in a lot of our formal education around exactly what just happened here.
Yes.
The skill of adapting to someone else, like the attitude we take on, attention to nonverbal stuff, flow, improvising well, can be very difficult because we don't have much in the way of education for this in our formal educational system. So here's what we're going to do. Okay. What I want to really hone in on there for folks listening, especially, is the idea of mistakes. What happened when mistakes were made? We blamed each other, right? And so the approach to mistakes is really critical in framing how open and joyful people can be about what happens with communication. So let's go to the second round here. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, except it's clap for number 1. We're taking the number 1 out of it. Clap 2, 3, clap 2, 3. Still go as fast as possible. And here's the one big change we're going to make. Anytime we don't know what we're doing, we implode, we're off meter, whatever it is, we're gonna both go, woohoo. Okay. You want to do it?
Okay.
Let's just practice. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Woo!
Woo-hoo. There we go. You got it. Okay. So we do that no matter what. And then we just keep going as fast as possible. Okay. We're gonna screw up. And I say, try to screw up. Like, have fun screwing up. Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go. Ready? And
2,
3, 2,
3, 2.
Woohoo! I don't know where we're at. And we'll, for the sake of this, we'll cut it there. Did that feel any different?
Yeah.
Much different, right? And in a room of 30 people, all of a sudden the atmosphere was very negative. All of a sudden people are laughing, woohooing, they're having a great time. And so I use that to hone in on the social world that we just created. I said, at a moment's notice, with one little change in our norm here, we're going to woohoo mistakes. People go, oh, it was a really positive climate. And I said, I think we talk too much about culture often when it comes to organizations. That's a big monolithic thing, culture. What is within our reach from a communication perspective is the immediate climate. Any of us have the ability to try to intervene in the climate of a situation and turn what might have been a negative episode or negative framing of the situation into a positive climate. And I see people go, oh yeah, like I really do have these critical moments like this where we can choose to go for something more positive, right? And the other thing is holding on to mistakes. So I often see, in the previous version, because like I wish I'd done that, or versus this one, it's just like, whatever happens, we're going to acknowledge it. We need to acknowledge mistakes, but we're also going to woohoo and keep going in the hopes of getting better. And all of a sudden people are freed up. Their communication frees up. They're smiling there, right? Yeah. So any other thoughts you have on that?
Yes, I have 2 thoughts. First of all, one is that you did a great example of what we talked about earlier in the conversation of using the skill of defining the episode for the episode, because just you saying, this interaction is about being positive about our mistakes, we're woohooing on that second time. That was you setting the expectation of that interaction, saying, this is the episode. And in this episode, we're positive about our mistake. We woohoo mistakes,
That's right.
And I think that was powerful. And then upon reflecting on my behavior in the first one, it is, I think, telling about me to say that I'm certainly like oriented toward like, I want to achieve, I want to succeed, I want to do well. That was always how I was like in school. And so I'm reading the like intensity that I brought to that first counting as not I don't think I can count, but regardless of how I feel about the actual content of this, I want to excel at whatever we're about to do, even though it's something that is as low stakes as counting to 3,
right?
With literally no consequences. You're not going to say, oh my God, gold star, Abbie, you're the perfect, the best counter I've ever encountered. Like there's no possibility of that at all. And yet I'm still so like wired towards that. And I am someone that like, I take my mistakes very seriously. Yeah. And so it's again, that like, what's your kind of default you're sliding into versus the intentional choice you make. I didn't, when you said, let's count 1, 2, 3, I wasn't like, okay, I'm going to choose to like lean in and be really intense about that. That's just something that happened. That was my default. Right. But when you give me the choice to say, what if we're actually positive about our mistakes? And what if it's not a big deal? That gave me like the permission almost to lean back and be like, oh, let me actually approach this even physically in a different way. I was like, I'm specifically not tensing up my body right now for this, because the way you framed the episode, I knew there was no need to.
That's exactly it. Yeah, really well put. I think one of the things that we did here to make you feel that way was we stripped out the potential for judgment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We need judgment. We need critique, but why don't we hold off on that for a bit so we can create together first? So by giving ourselves that little rule of woohoo, it was like, oh, no matter what happens, I got some psychological safety here.
Yeah.
Right? There's some risk taking that will be fun. So really critical to communicating well, I think. Do you want to do the final round? We'll do it really fast for folks. Do we have time?
Okay. Yeah, we
final
got time.
Round. Here we go. I have to do the Zoom version now.
Uh-huh.
No numbers. Clap, snap, and just hit the desk with your palm. Okay. Okay. And this is the one I'm worst at, by the way.
Sure.
But here's the deal. We don't care because we're going to keep the woohoo. One of us messes up. We don't know where we're at. Again, the woohoo. Okay. So here we go.
Yeah.
Clap, snap, hit the desk. Here we go. And I'm going to start.
Woohoo, I don't even know what's going on already.
Yeah.
I'm already messed up.
It's really funny. Hard. So we'll just fast forward on this one. So which of the 3 rounds did you find the hardest?
Well, the last one.
The last one. That's not the same for everybody. And I have used people put their hands up. Some people say the first one.
Interesting.
Just the 1, 2, 3, right? Oh,
yeah.
Some people found that the easiest. They find it just, they're very fluent with numbers. That one was largely cognitive, right?
Right.
The middle one was a difficult one because it was like put the body against the brain, and those are hard things to do. That's what you're doing when you're doing something like public speaking. You are using your body so much, but your brain's involved, and right, things that don't necessarily go together well. The last one was just all movement, kinesthetic. I did the last one with a nonprofit dance company in New York City. And the last one, they were just like, boom, 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 boom. Like it was a wonder to watch.
Yeah.
But that's because they are so embodied.
Exactly.
Got that kinesthetic intelligence. And right. So this also gets at the idea of default settings. What ways are we strong? What's easy? What's not?
Yes.
Do I need to step into more embodied behaviors? So
and that my default is different than a dancer's default.
That's right.
Or anybody else. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's so many applications. Talk about a crisis happens at your organization. What's going on with your mind, your body? What kind of attitude do you have? How are we strung for moments like those? How could we train ourselves to be, from a communication perspective, to be better prepared for moments where we have a learning? This is a learning that occurs by the nervous system. Right. A learning from the neck down as well as head up.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground here, Abbie.
I know, it's been great. Are there any final things that you wanted to share about today before we wrap up?
I think we should just tell people about the Cosmopolis project and just reinforce that is, I'm a part of that. You're a part of that. There's others who are a part of that. This is in development. It's very much TBD, I think, but that's going to be exciting. So do you want to just tell folks a little bit about it? I'll share a little bit too.
Yeah. So the Cosmopolis 2045 project, the main product of that being the Cosmopolis 2045 website, which is, I thought about it earlier when you talked about, I don't know, what did you say, proto-public or something like that, where it's this, what the website itself is this collective imagining of what a future society could look like if we really believe that communicating matters, and how our government would function, and how education systems would function, and what community life would look like. And it's what you mentioned earlier, this kind of like safe space to practice and think through what life could look like if we did do things differently. And this kind of acts as the transition step between what we did and what we want to do, because it's big changes. It's changes at an organizational level, a political level, and at the same time at the interpersonal level. And so this website there's stories of the characters that live in this society, and stories about the different events that happened over time in this community. And yeah, I think it's just really rich. And I'm hoping that we can keep getting it into more people's hands and heads so that, it can just keep generating more and more ideas for people about how they want to choose to be and how they want to revise.
That's a great way to put it. I think for me, it also goes back to what Barnett Pierce talked about, is the question of what if our leaders and authority figures took the forms of communication that they use as seriously as the issues and the topics that they focus on.
Yeah.
So what would a city council meeting look like with great process and robust quality forms of communication baked into it at an institutional level? We see things like this already happening with participatory budgeting initiatives around the world.
Yep.
How do we make budgeting more of a democratic, open process for people than behind closed doors, which it is in a lot of government? Those are the kinds of things this is trying to tackle in a very practical, real world way. We're showing not only are these types of things happening in places, identifying those, but we're also imagining what futures could look like.
Yeah.
At the political level, social level, in our public life, mostly.
Yep.
In our justice system, which Robin Penman is taking on.
Yeah.
And teaching us a lot about what could it look like in the criminal justice system, if we even want to call it that, to begin with, right? So putting our terms up for reevaluation. So very, very exciting. And that's something I think everybody should watch. I'll just say last thing, I did write Improv for Democracy for folks working in communication leadership. It's chock full of theory and concepts, but every step of the way, I translate it in terms of improv games and exercises that you can use. And it's just really fun. The games are kind of addictive. We do every Sunday night, my family and I have dinner, and I usually play one of the games with my family too. Okay, kids, we're going to play whoosh bong, throw the whoosh bong. I won't get into what that is. It's a whole separate thing, right?
But they can read the book to find out.
Yeah, they love it. And I notice, again, just like we just did, there are just moments during the week where I go, let's create some space for joy here, because it's been a really hard week. So whether it's your personal life or professional life, I think a lot of listeners to this podcast would find the book useful. Yeah,
that's really great. That'll be a great tool. So we'll make sure we link that for people to be able to find easily. And as I assumed, I'm sure I could sit here and talk to you for many, many more hours, but this was a really valuable conversation for me. And I'm excited about the ideas and energy that came out of it. And this is, for me, at least one of the things that generates joy in my life, is to be able to have meaningful conversations with interesting people.
Great. And we should collectively thank you, Abbie, for all the work you're doing with the CMM Institute and translating this work in multimodal ways through videos and things. We're all so appreciative and really excited for what you've been doing to spread this work.
Well, I appreciate your appreciation. Thanks, Don.
All right. Thanks, Abbie.
Okay, that is all for our conversation with Don. Thank you again for joining us and being a part of it. I hope that you were able to take some meaning away from it. I know that I certainly was. As far as next turns, I want to ask you to keep in mind the questions that I have at the top of the podcast description, which are: how can we become more conscious of the third culture we create with others? What new perspective and understanding can we gain when we zoom in and zoom out during our interactions with others? And what can we learn about the way we show up to ourselves in the way that we show up to others? As always, I am supported by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. This podcast is one of many, many initiatives that are designed with the goal of helping us move just one step closer toward that better social world that we are envisioning for ourselves and actively participating in creating. And finally, podcast next turn, please share this episode along with part 1 with someone who you would like to invite into the conversation. It's all about continuing the dialogue in our own lives. And a great way to do that is to bring the people into your life, introduce them to these episodes, invite them in, and then be able to have conversations about the kind of content we talk about here in other ways. Another way to keep the dialogue alive is to reach out. I'm always happy to be in dialogue with you as well. You can contact me through email, through the website, or by commenting on Instagram and YouTube. And again, you can find the links to all of those in the podcast description. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this is Stories Lived, Stories Told.